The morning began with the sound of laughter, the kind I hadn't heard from Emily in months. She sat by the window in her wheelchair, brushing Sonny's golden fur as sunlight danced through the blinds. His tail thumped against the floor like a heartbeat of happiness. For once, the house didn't feel heavy with grief. I poured coffee, letting myself believe, maybe, just maybe, we were healing. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the door, precise and cold. I opened it to find a white envelope taped to the frame, stamped with the HOA seal like a warning brand. My name printed in bold, immediate violation notice. My stomach tightened before I even unfolded it. Unauthorized animal detected, must be removed within 14 days. My eyes blurred over the words. My hand trembled as I looked at the porch where Sonny sat beside Emily's wheelchair, his head resting gently on her lap. She smiled up at me, her small fingers tangled in his fur. "What's wrong, Daddy?" I couldn't answer. The wind caught the edge of the letter and flapped it against my hand like it wanted to be heard. Ban, remove, violation. My throat burned. Across the street, Karen Lewis stood in her manicured driveway, arms folded, her bright yellow blouse gleaming in the sun like a badge of arrogance. The faintest smirk tugged her lips. She knew I'd read it. She wanted to see the look on my face when I realized she'd found a way to take away the only thing keeping my daughter smiling. Sonny wagged his tail, oblivious. Emily giggled softly. And I, standing there in the doorway, felt the calm of the morning die right in my chest. Before everything changed, our neighborhood looked like the kind of place realtors used to brag about: manicured lawns, pastel mailboxes, kids riding scooters, and parents waving at each other on their way to work. Every Friday smelled like barbecue and gasoline. It was the kind of suburb that promised safety, order, and routine, but hid judgment behind white fences. I moved here 3 years ago, after the accident. Emily had been 6 then, bright, curious, obsessed with butterflies and sidewalk chalk. One rainy night, a drunk driver veered onto the wrong lane. I still remember the shattering sound, the smell of metal and rain. She survived, but the damage to her spine was irreversible. The doctors called it a miracle she could sit up at all. I called it my curse, because no father should ever hear his daughter ask, "Will I ever run again?" The house we bought was supposed to be our restart. The quiet cul-de-sac, the trimmed hedges, all of it looked like stability. But the silence hit differently when the laughter stopped. Emily rarely left her room. The first year, I heard her cry herself to sleep. I tried everything: therapy, medication, online support groups, but she'd lost the spark that made her Emily. Until Sonny. He came from a veterans therapy program, a golden retriever with soft amber eyes that seemed to understand pain. The first time he met her, he walked straight to her wheelchair, pressed his head into her lap, and refused to move. She looked up at me, smiled for the first time in months, and whispered, "He likes me, Daddy." From that day, Sonny wasn't just a dog, he was her lifeline. He guided her through panic attacks, sensed her night terrors, even fetched her medication pouch when she forgot. Our routine was sacred. Morning walks down Maple Avenue, afternoon sun by the porch, bedtime stories with Sonny curled by her feet. I kept thinking, maybe we'd finally outrun the grief. Then Karen Lewis moved in across the street. Newly divorced, self-appointed HOA president, and allergic to anything that didn't match her sense of perfection. Her yard looked like a magazine cover, her personality, like the warning label. She'd wave every morning, her smile tight and sharp, always scanning, as if the neighborhood were her kingdom. At first, I didn't think much of it. She'd comment on Sonny's leash color or remind me about community uniformity standards. Little things that felt harmless. But something in her eyes always lingered, like she was cataloging me, finding my weaknesses. Still, I ignored it. Because Emily was happy again. And when your child finally smiles after 2 years of darkness, you learn to protect that light with your life. So when that violation letter showed up on our door, accusing Sunny of lowering property value, it didn't just feel like a complaint. It felt like an attack. Not on me. On her. I looked at the picture of Emily and Sunny taped to our fridge, her arms around his neck, sunlight in her hair, and I swore to myself, whatever Karen Lewis was planning, she had no idea who she was messing with. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm breeze, sprinklers hissing across green lawns, and the faint hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the block. I was trimming the hedges when I saw her crossing the street, clipboard tucked under one arm, a glass of iced tea in her hand like she was royalty on inspection. Karen Lewis didn't walk, she glided, chin high, every step rehearsed. Her bright yellow blouse glowed under the sun, gold hoops swinging like tiny pendulums of judgment. "Good afternoon," she called, her voice sugary and sharp all at once. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I wiped the sweat from my brow. "Sure is." Her eyes flicked to Sunny, who was lounging in the shade beside Emily's wheelchair. Emily was giggling, tossing him small bits of her sandwich. Karen's smile stiffened. "I've been meaning to talk about him," she said, nodding toward Sunny. I felt my shoulders tense. "He's Emily's therapy dog. Certified, trained, completely harmless." "Oh, I'm sure he's lovely," she cooed, stepping closer. The scent of floral perfume hit me, too sweet to be kind. "But you see, our HOA regulations have very specific guidelines about animals. Therapy or not, pets can be problematic. Property values are delicate things." I looked her dead in the eye. "Property values don't heal broken spines, Karen." Her lips twitched, but she didn't flinch. "I understand your situation," she said softly, lowering her voice as if sympathy were a performance. "But rules are rules. Exceptions lead to chaos. And I've worked very hard to keep Maple Avenue orderly." "Orderly," I repeated. "You mean quiet enough for you to feel important?" Her fake smile faltered. She glanced at Emily, still laughing with Sunny. "Children need structure," she murmured, the words tasting like threat. "Too much attachment to animals can delay emotional progress. You might consider what's best for her long term." Something hot rose in my chest. "What's best for her," I said slowly, "is peace. And right now, peace looks like a golden retriever who makes her want to wake up every morning." For a second, her mask cracked, a flash of irritation behind her polished expression. Then she recovered, pulling her clipboard close. "I see," she said. "Well, I'll make a note. The board meets Tuesday. Perhaps we can revisit this discussion." She turned, heels clicking on the pavement, sunlight glinting off her hair like a warning flare. As she walked away, Sunny let out a low growl, something he'd never done before. Emily reached down and stroked his fur. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though her eyes followed Karen until she disappeared into her perfect white house. I didn't know it then, but that short walk across the street was the moment she declared war, and she wouldn't stop until she'd taken everything that made my daughter smile. It didn't take long for Karen to make good on her promise. The very next morning, I found another white envelope taped to the mailbox, violation number 2, unsanctioned lawn accessory, dog house. Except it wasn't a dog house. It was a small wooden shelter I'd built to keep Sunny shaded when Emily wanted to play outside. But in Karen's world, kindness was clutter. Within days, the letters multiplied. Unapproved pet activity. Failure to maintain aesthetic consistency. Noise disturbance, barking. I swear Sunny barked maybe twice a week, usually when the mailman came. Still, each notice came with that same glittering signature, Karen L. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it would pass. But then came the photos. Grainy shots of Sunny in the yard, Emily throwing a ball, me picking up after him, printed and slipped into envelopes marked evidence. She even began copying the other neighbors in her emails, CCNG half the street with subject lines like, community standards concern, and, maintaining neighborhood harmony. The whispers followed. People I'd chatted with every morning now looked away. The couple next door stopped waving. One afternoon, as I wheeled Emily back from her therapy session, I overheard Mrs. Green mutter to her husband, "It's such a shame. That dog's going to bring trouble." Emily noticed the change too. "Dad," she said quietly, "did we do something wrong?" I forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people just forget how to be kind." But inside, I was boiling. A few nights later, I caught headlights flickering outside. I peered through the blinds, Karen, in her robe, camera in hand, taking pictures of Sunny lying on the porch. I stormed outside. "Karen!" I barked. "What are you doing?" She didn't even flinch. "Just documenting ongoing violations," she said calmly, tapping her clipboard. "It's all part of the process." "Process?" I hissed. "You're harassing a child and her therapy dog." Her expression never changed. "I'm ensuring community standards are upheld. You're free to appeal, though I wouldn't recommend it. The board respects consistency." She smiled faintly, turned, and walked back to her house. The next morning, Emily's name wasn't on the invitation list for the neighborhood summer block party. Every other kid had one. When I asked the event organizer, she stammered, it must have been a mix-up." But her eyes darted toward Karen's house. That was the day I realized Karen's influence ran deep. She wasn't just a neighbor, she was a tyrant with a clipboard. Every email, every whisper, every mistake was a brick in the wall she was building around us. By the end of that week, I couldn't even take Sunny outside without feeling eyes on me, blinds shifting, doors cracking open, phones subtly lifted for pictures. Emily stopped smiling again. She'd sit by the window, leash in hand, waiting for me to say it was safe to go out. I knew then, this wasn't about rules. It was personal. Karen wanted control, and she'd found the perfect target, a grieving father and his disabled daughter. But what she didn't know was that when you push a parent far enough, you stop fighting fair. It was a Tuesday evening, just after sunset, when everything fell apart. The sky burned orange over the rooftops, cicadas humming in the background, and for the first time in days, Emily seemed peaceful. She was on the porch, brushing Sunny's fur while humming softly to a tune only she knew. I remember standing by the kitchen window, thinking, maybe things were finally calming down. Maybe Karen had grown tired of her crusade. Then Sunny whimpered. At first, it was soft, barely noticeable over the sound of the sprinklers. Emily tilted her head. "You okay, boy?" she asked, voice light. But the next sound, a guttural choke, snapped through the air like a lightning strike. Sunny staggered backward, his legs trembling, foam dripping from his mouth. "Dad!" Emily screamed. I dropped the dish in my hand and sprinted out the door. Sunny collapsed near the steps, body jerking violently. His eyes darted, terrified. Emily sobbed, reaching for him as her wheelchair jolted forward. "Do something, Daddy. Please." My hands were shaking as I knelt beside him, trying to keep his head still. His breathing was ragged, shallow. I could smell something metallic, something wrong. "Get in the truck," I yelled, scooping Sunny into my arms. Now. I don't remember half the drive. Just Emily's cries echoing in the back seat and the flashing red of the stoplights blurring together. When we burst into the emergency vet clinic, the tech at the front desk took one look and shouted for help. They pulled Sunny from my arms and rushed him through swinging doors. I stood frozen in the hallway, Emily gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. "He's gonna be okay, right?" she whispered. I wanted to promise her, to give her something solid, but my mouth wouldn't move. The minutes crawled. The sterile smell of disinfectant burned my nose. A monitor beeped somewhere behind the doors, steady, then uneven. My heart mirrored it. Finally, the vet came out, a woman in scrubs, gloves stained with something dark. "He's stable for now," she said, her voice measured. "But he ingested rat poison. A large amount." I stared at her. "That's impossible. We don't even own poison." She sighed. "It was deliberate. Someone put it where he could reach it." Emily's sobs filled the room. My hands clenched into fists so tight my knuckles turned white. "Can you save him?" I asked. "We'll do everything we can. But it'll take time, and luck." We stayed there all night, the hum of machines surrounding us. Emily wouldn't let go of my arm. Her lips kept forming the same silent prayer, "Please don't take him too." When dawn broke, the vet said Sonny would live, barely. But something inside me had already died. On the way home, the neighborhood looked the same, clean, perfect, soulless. But I noticed something taped to my fence. Another envelope. Another violation notice. "Final warning," it read. That was it. The last straw. I tore the paper in half and looked across the street. Karen's curtains shifted. I saw her silhouette, still and smug, holding her coffee like a trophy. That was when I swore to myself, I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to end this. She wanted to play by the rules. Fine. I'd bury her with them. The week after Sonny's poisoning felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Even though the vet said he'd recover, the damage to Emily was already done. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk, wouldn't even look at the porch. The sound of Sonny's labored breathing through his recovery cone haunted the nights. Every soft whimper from him made her flinch. It was as if the world had reminded her that happiness was dangerous, that anything she loved could be taken away. She stopped asking to go outside. The wheelchair sat by the door, untouched. She'd just sit by her window, watching other kids ride their bikes down the same street that had turned against her. I'd try to start conversations, about cartoons, about her favorite stories, but her eyes stayed distant. When I touched her shoulder, she'd whisper, "Why do they hate us, Dad?" I didn't know how to answer. Because how do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes cruelty hides behind manicured lawns and community newsletters? That people like Karen wore smiles like masks and destroyed lives through paperwork instead of weapons? I tried to fight the HOA the right way. I filed appeals, wrote letters, even called the county office. Each time, I got the same response, polite but hollow, "We'll look into it." Days turned into weeks. Nothing changed. The fines kept arriving, the threats grew sharper. Every envelope felt heavier than the last. At night, I'd sit by Sonny's bed, stroking his fur, listening to the soft tick of the wall clock. I felt powerless, a father who couldn't protect his daughter or the creature that gave her hope. Guilt burned in my chest like acid. I'd look at Emily asleep, her face pale under the soft glow of the nightlight, and I'd wonder when she stopped believing I could fix things. The neighborhood moved on as if nothing had happened. Kids played. Lawns got mowed. Karen waved at cars with that same brittle smile. To everyone else, she was the model neighbor, organized, efficient, dedicated. To me, she was the quiet monster who'd poisoned our peace. One night, I found Emily sitting on the floor beside Sonny. She had placed her favorite stuffed bear next to his bed. "He needs someone to protect him too," she said softly. That broke me. I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and finally let myself cry. All the anger, the helplessness, the shame, it poured out in shaking breaths. I had spent weeks begging for justice from people who didn't care. That night, I stopped begging. Because in that helpless silence, I finally understood, I didn't need permission to protect my family. I needed proof. It started with a noise, a faint metallic rattle near the fence while I was up late checking on Sunny. The porch light was off, and the night air carried that strange, heavy stillness that makes your skin prickle. I stepped closer, slow, careful. There was a soft crunch of gravel, then silence. Whoever it was had already gone. But something inside me whispered that I wasn't paranoid, I was being watched. The next morning, I decided to install cameras. Not the obvious kind, but small motion-activated ones hidden under the eaves and near the fence line. Emily didn't even know. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, but deep down I was hunting for proof. A few nights later, I sat at my desk, scrolling through footage. Most of it was boring: raccoons, headlights, delivery trucks. And then I saw her. Karen. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m. She was standing by the corner of my yard, flashlight in one hand, something small and shiny in the other, a container. She bent down, poured something near the fence, then looked up toward my house as if to check if anyone was watching. I leaned in closer. The night vision captured her face clearly, her lips curved in that same smug smile I'd seen 100 times in daylight. My hands clenched around the mouse. The air in my chest turned electric. There it was, the proof. The thing I'd been waiting for. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it over the silence of the room. The next morning, I printed still frames, time-stamped and clear as day. I could have stormed across the street right then, shoved them in her face, but something stopped me. I realized if she'd gone that far once, she could go further. I needed to be smarter. So I began digging. I pulled every HOA letter, every email, every message she'd ever sent. Patterns started to appear: dates, signatures, inconsistencies. I found out the anonymous neighbor complaints she cited were written from her own email, disguised with fake names. I even found old community audit records, showing she'd mismanaged funds from HOA dues 2 years earlier. By the time the sun rose, I had a folder thick with evidence and a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time since the accident, I looked at Emily sleeping and thought, we're going to win this. Karen thought she was the queen of Maple Avenue, but I was about to remind her that every tyrant falls the same way, quietly, and from the inside. Once I had the footage, everything changed. The fear that used to keep me quiet turned into precision, the kind of sharp focus that comes from being done with mercy. I wasn't just a grieving father anymore. I was an investigator, and Karen had left a trail of fingerprints across every inch of her empire. I started with the HOA's public records. Every email, every notice, every fine had a digital footprint. Late at night, while Emily slept with Sunny curled beside her, I sat under the dim glow of my laptop, piecing together the story she thought she'd buried. I discovered she'd been issuing fines to selective homeowners, mostly single parents and retirees, people who couldn't fight back. And the payments? They didn't always end up in the association's account. Some were quietly redirected through a maintenance fund that, according to county records, didn't even exist. Then I called a few neighbors, carefully. The same people who once avoided me now hesitated, voices low, scared. But when I mentioned I had proof of what Karen had done, the tone changed. One woman, Mrs. Green, admitted that Karen had pressured her into signing fake complaint letters. She said it was just paperwork to keep the neighborhood organized, she whispered. Another neighbor, Mr. Wallace, revealed Karen had promised to overlook his shed renovation in exchange for a small donation to her pet beautification project. Piece by piece, the truth began to take shape, a quiet corruption empire disguised as community service. I filed open record requests with the county's housing department, claiming I was preparing a local complaint. That's when I found something explosive. Karen's real estate license had been under probation 2 years ago for unethical client management. She'd hidden it from the board by filing documents under her maiden name. That was my breaking dawn moment. She'd built her entire reputation on power, control, and manipulation, and now I had enough to tear it apart. But I wasn't ready to go public just yet. I needed her cornered. Completely. I printed every document, labeled each file, cross-referenced each date. The folder grew thicker each night. I made copies, digital backups on encrypted drives, physical duplicates in sealed envelopes. If anything happened to me or Emily, I wanted her downfall to be automatic. Then came the final piece, an anonymous tip I submitted to the county housing fraud department. Within 2 days, I received an automated email, complaint received. Investigation pending. That single line was oxygen. The next morning, I saw her jogging down the street, waving to a neighbor, her perfect little smile glowing in the sunrise. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, and watched her, my folder sitting on the table behind me like a silent weapon. She still thought she ruled this street. She had no idea that her kingdom was already cracking from underneath her heels. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was building her cage, one file, one witness, one lie at a time. The first crack in Karen's empire came quietly, an email marked, confidential, pending HOA investigation. It arrived early Monday morning, just as the sunlight poured across my kitchen table, illuminating the thick folder of evidence I'd been building for weeks. The county housing department had officially launched an inquiry into the Maple Avenue Homeowners Association. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I just sat there, staring at the words, feeling something I hadn't in months: control. Within days, the neighborhood began to hum with unease. Inspectors started showing up, clipboards in hand, asking questions Karen couldn't deflect with charm. They went door to door, quietly gathering statements from homeowners. Some people avoided eye contact, others spoke in whispers. By the end of the week, everyone knew something was wrong with the HOA. I kept my distance, playing the part of the calm, oblivious neighbor. But every night, I received updates from the county office: forged signatures, altered ledgers, personal payments misclassified as maintenance expenses. Each line was a nail in her coffin. Then came the board meeting. Karen had called an emergency session to address misinformation circulating in the community. The clubhouse was packed, neighbors filling every chair, murmurs buzzing like angry bees. She stood at the front, her usual composure cracking around the edges. Her smile was too tight, her hands clasped just a little too firmly. "Fellow homeowners," she began, her voice trembling beneath its practiced warmth, "we are under attack by individuals spreading false allegations meant to destabilize our community. I assure you, everything is under control." That's when I stood up. "Under control?" I asked, holding up a folder. "Then maybe you can explain why HOA dues were transferred into a private account under your maiden name." The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. Her expression froze. "Excuse me?" I stepped forward, sliding a printed document across the table. "County records. Time-stamped. And this," I held up another page, "is footage of you trespassing on my property, pouring poison near my fence. The same week my daughter's therapy dog nearly died." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face drained of color. "That's fabricated," she stammered. "You can't just—" "Oh, I can," I interrupted. "And so can the county fraud department. They already have copies. The same department that just froze your HOA's accounts pending investigation." For the first time since I'd known her, Karen was speechless. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Mrs. Green stood up from the back row. "You told me to sign false complaints against him," she said, her voice shaking. "I have the emails." Voices erupted. Neighbors who'd been silent for months suddenly found their courage. Accusations, confessions, outrage, the room boiled over. Karen tried to speak, but no one was listening anymore. Her own board members turned away. The kingmaker of Maple Avenue was suddenly alone, cornered by the very people she'd ruled. As I walked out into the cool night air, I heard her shouting something about lawyers and defamation. But her voice sounded small now, powerless. For the first time in a long time, the street felt quiet again. Not the fearful silence she'd created, but the calm that follows a storm that's finally broken. The following week, the county officials announced a mandatory HOA audit and a public hearing for community misconduct and financial misrepresentation. Karen's name was printed right there in the notice, bold and black, like a stain she could no longer scrub off. The meeting was scheduled for Friday night, the same day her "for sale" sign quietly vanished from her yard. I guess she thought running would save her. She was wrong. By the time I arrived at the community hall, the air was thick with tension. Neighbors huddled in corners whispering, their faces caught between anger and disbelief. Folding chairs filled the room, the projector flickering against the beige wall. Karen stood near the front table, surrounded by a few loyal board members who now looked more nervous than loyal. She wore her usual bright yellow blouse, but the confidence that used to radiate from her had dimmed, her eyes darted from face to face like a trapped animal searching for an exit. "Let's begin," said the county investigator, a middle-aged man with a calm but firm voice. "Tonight, we're reviewing allegations of fraud, harassment, and misconduct within the Maple Avenue Homeowners Association." Karen stepped forward, forcing a smile. "Before we get carried away," she began, "I'd like to remind everyone that gossip and jealousy often distort the truth. I've served this community faithfully for years. These claims," I stood, "are all documented." The room went dead silent. I carried a box to the table, heavy with evidence, the printed emails, bank statements, security footage, witness letters. I placed it down with a dull thud that echoed through the hall. Karen's smile faltered. "Mr. Reynolds," the investigator said, "you're the primary complainant?" "Yes," I said, locking eyes with her. "And I'm done being quiet." I clicked the remote in my hand. The screen behind us lit up, a still image of Karen in night vision, crouched by my fence, flashlight in one hand, the poison container in the other. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "That's a lie," she shouted. "That's been edited. He's framing me." I played the video. Her voice from the footage filled the room, faint but clear. "Let's see how they like this." The crowd erupted. Mrs. Green stood up again. "She told me to sign false letters," she said, holding up her phone. "I still have the texts." Mr. Wallace added, "She made me pay a beautification donation to approve my shed. Said it was for HOA improvements." The investigator raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Ms. Lewis," he said, his tone sharpening, "you are currently under review for both financial misconduct and criminal harassment. Do you deny your involvement in these transactions and communications?" Karen's composure cracked completely. Her face turned red, her hands trembling as she shuffled her papers. "You don't understand," she snapped. "I was the HOA. I kept this neighborhood beautiful, disciplined, respectable. Without me, this place falls apart." I stepped closer, voice low but steady. "Without you, this place can finally breathe." The investigator closed the file. "Effective immediately, you are suspended as HOA president pending full prosecution. You are also being referred to the county attorney for criminal charges related to trespassing, harassment, and fraud." Karen froze, mouth open. One of her board members quietly stood up, took off his HOA badge, and placed it on the table. "I'm done," he muttered. Another followed. And another. Within seconds, she stood alone, the self-appointed queen stripped of her crown. She looked at me, eyes burning with fury and disbelief. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You'll regret this. People like you always do." I met her stare. People like me? No. People like you, the ones who think power means cruelty, they regret it. As the officers escorted her out, the crowd erupted in murmurs, relief, vindication, even applause. Emily was in the back row with Sonny beside her, his golden fur catching the dim light. When our eyes met, she smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Outside, as Karen was led to the waiting patrol car, she tried one last time to turn the narrative. "I built this place," she shouted. "You'll all be begging for me back when your lawns die and your streets fall apart." But no one responded. Not a single soul. I walked out after her, the cool evening wind brushing against my face. For months, she had poisoned everything she touched, our peace, our home, our hope. But now, for the first time, I could breathe without that shadow looming over my daughter's laughter. As the car drove away, Emily wheeled up beside me, Sonny resting his chin on her knee. "Is it really over, Daddy?" she asked. I looked up at the fading sunset and nodded. "Yeah, sweetheart. It's finally over." The neighborhood felt different after that night, lighter somehow, as if the air itself had been scrubbed clean. For the first time in months, there were no envelopes taped to my door, no cameras flashing from behind half-closed blinds. Karen's house sat quiet across the street, its blinds drawn, its front yard no longer trimmed to perfection. Within a week, a bright red "for sale" sign appeared on her once pristine lawn. It leaned slightly to one side, like even the ground beneath it refused to cooperate. The HOA board dissolved under county supervision, and a temporary committee of neighbors was formed to rebuild the rules, not as weapons, but as guidelines for community peace. Mrs. Green knocked on my door one morning, holding a basket of muffins and an apology trembling on her lips. "I'm so sorry," she said, eyes glossy. "We all saw what was happening. We just didn't want to be targets too." I nodded. I understood. Fear makes cowards out of good people. But now that fear was gone, replaced by something new, accountability. Mr. Wallace helped me fix the fence Karen had poisoned months ago. The Grays from 2 doors down brought over dinner one evening and spent hours laughing with Emily, who hadn't smiled that freely in so long. Slowly, Maple Avenue began to feel like a neighborhood again, not a battlefield. Sonny recovered fully. His fur shone golden again under the afternoon light, and his steps regained their spring. Emily wheeled herself outside every morning, letting him tug her gently down the path as birds sang overhead. I'd watch them from the porch, coffee in hand, heart finally steady. Sometimes I'd catch sight of Karen through her window in those final days before she moved. Curtains fluttering, shadows pacing. I wondered if she regretted it, or if she still believed she'd been right. But the truth was, I didn't need her remorse. Justice had already been served, and peace didn't require her apology. At the next community meeting, the new chairperson, a soft-spoken retired teacher, announced a reform: no HOA policy could override a medical or emotional support need. The room applauded. I saw Emily's grin stretch ear to ear. For her, that rule wasn't just policy, it was safety. As the sun dipped below the rows of houses that evening, painting everything gold, Emily and I sat on the porch with Sonny curled between us. She leaned her head against my arm and whispered, "It feels different now." "Yeah," I said quietly, watching the light fade across the horizon. "It finally feels like home again." Behind us, the "for sale" sign creaked in the breeze. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt no anger, no fear, only the slow, calm rhythm of a neighborhood healing itself. A few weeks after Karen's moving truck disappeared down Maple Avenue, peace finally stopped feeling like a visitor, it felt like it belonged here again. The days grew warmer, the air smelled like cut grass and lilacs, and the street that once echoed with tension now carried the soft sounds of laughter and life. Kids rode their bikes past our yard again. Neighbors waved instead of whispering. Even the evening silence felt gentler, no longer heavy, just still. Emily had started therapy again, but this time, not out of fear. She worked on building strength, learning how to navigate the world with confidence instead of apology. Sonny never left her side. He'd rest his head against her knee as she practiced, his golden fur catching the sunlight. One afternoon, I came outside to see her racing him down the sidewalk in her wheelchair, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. For a moment, I didn't see the accident, the fear, or the pain. I just saw my daughter being a kid again. That was worth everything. That evening, as the sky bled into pink and amber, we sat on the porch together. Emily fed Sonny little bits of cookie, his tail thumping lazily against the wooden floorboards. "Do you think she ever thinks about what she did?" she asked quietly, eyes fixed on the empty house across the street. I took a breath, watching the last light fade behind the rooftops. "Maybe," I said. "But people like her, they don't learn because someone punishes them. They learn when they lose what they thought they controlled." She nodded thoughtfully, then looked at Sonny. "She can't hurt anyone else now." "No," I said softly. "She can't." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas hum and the wind rustle the leaves. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger burning in my chest. Just a deep, quiet gratitude, for my daughter's strength, for the dog who saved her, and for the justice that had finally found its way to our doorstep. As the porch light flickered on, Emily smiled. "We're okay now, huh?" I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Yeah, sweetheart," I whispered. "We're more than okay. We made it." And as Sonny laid his head in her lap and the stars began to bloom overhead, I realized something simple, something true: peace doesn't always come when the noise ends. Sometimes it comes when you finally stop fighting to be believed, and start living again.